Yeah, I don't think this joke aged all too well now that I think about it.
Hello there everyone, my name is Mr. Orichalcos, and welcome to the start of a new Yu-Gi-Oh series that I'll be doing to coincide with my ongoing Yu-Gi-Oh 101 series. I call it the Yu-Gi-Oh 101 Database. In this series, I will be analysing the decks and archetypes that I did Yu-Gi-Oh 101s of, looking at their strengths and weaknesses, and giving a few tips on how one were to make the deck themselves. Think of it as a more informative version of Ranked N Yu-Gi-Oh's Archetype Archive, if you will. I plan on doing this series first to catch up with my Yu-Gi-Oh 101 videos, before I continue on with said 101s, and then getting to work on its corresponding 101 database. So with all that said, let's start this series off by looking at the first archetype that I did a Yu-Gi-Oh 101 of, T.G.s. T.G.s, or TG for short, is an archetype used by Bruno aka Antimony in the Yu-Gi-Oh 5D's anime, whose main purpose is to be a hyper-synchro deck to rival that of Yusei's Synchron deck. However, that didn't initially translate well in the actual card game, as TGs were instead mainly used in stun variants before Inzectors and Wind-Ups ruined the format alongside the infamous March 2012 ban list. The deck would then fade into irrelevancy for nearly a decade, until finally getting used support in Savage Strike, where it would finally become the deck that it very much needed to be, an aggressive hyper-synchro deck. Sadly, even in a format dominated by Sky Strikers and the soon-to-arrive Dragon Link deck, the new age TGs probably won't return to the metagame anytime soon, despite how good these new cards were. So how did TG go from a bizarre yet admirable stun deck to an almost forgotten hyper-synchro deck? Well, let's find out by starting off with their card lineup. We'll be looking at each of their cards in all of their appearance, so we start off with T.G. Cyber Magician, a level 1 light spellcaster tuner monster with 0 attack and defense and the following effect. If this card you control would be used as synchro material for a TG monster, TG monsters in your hand can be used as the non-tuner synchro materials. Once per turn during the end phase, if this card is in the graveyard because it was destroyed on the field and sent there this turn, you can add one TG monster from your deck to your hand except TG Cyber Magician. This end phase effect of adding a differently named TG monster to the hand is something I shall dub the end phase floating effect, as it's implemented on a number of the main deck TG monsters. As for Cyber Magician itself, it's pretty decent, at least for its time. A simple normal summon of this guy can easily net you a level 5 TG Synchro under the right circumstances. However, there was already a certain level 4 at the time that was played more so than Cyber Magician's Synchro purpose, if only in the stun variant. And in the Synchro based variant, it's sadly outclassed by the newer level 1 tuners the deck has to offer. Feel free to run it if you want to go old school, but just not in multiples. Up next is T.G. Striker, a level 2 Earth Warrior tuner with 800 attack and 0 defense, and with this effect. If only your opponent controls a monster, you can special summon this card from your hand, and once per turn, end phase floating effect. Infamously limited on the single most hated ban list of all time, Striker is by far and large one of the best monsters this deck has to offer. If you happen to be unlucky enough to go second in this deck while you have this in hand, you can at least summon this card for free, and should you have another monster in hand, you'll be able to bring out that one card which will cost you your life savings, and continue on from there to build up a powerful board to try and make a comeback. Plus, since it's a warrior, it opens the door to being used alongside Isolde, but we'll talk about that much later on. For now though, Striker is brilliant for TGs, and you should max out on this guy whenever possible. TG Catapult Dragon is their next level 2 monster, an Earth Dragon with 900 attack and 1300 defense. Once per turn, you can special summon one level 3 or lower TG tuner monster from your hand. And that's literally it. They didn't even bother giving it the end phase floating effect, thus further limiting its usefulness. All I can think of is that it at least helps you with summoning this mistake much easier, even though it only limits you to summoning level 3 or lower TG tuners, which only becomes even worse where the new support is concerned. You can technically run this if you want, but I don't think it's worth it at least. T.G. Jet Falcon is a level 3 Wind-Winged Beast tuner with 1400 attack and 1200 defense, and if this card is sent to the graveyard as a synchro material, inflict 500 damage to your opponent. Cause that's exactly what every 5D's deck needed, an out-of-place burn card. This does nothing to help facilitate the TG playstyle, it doesn't combo extend, it doesn't even give you an end-phase search. It's just a random burn card for the sake of an archetype needing a burn card because it was used one time in the anime. Besides, if you want to play Synchro Burn, go back to a time when Tempest Magician was still legal. This card is bad and you should feel bad for even thinking about running it. Next! The other level 3 is T.G. Warwolf, a Dark Beast warrior with 1200 attack and 0 defense in this effect. When a level 4 lower monster or monsters is special summoned, except during the damage step, you can special summon this card from your hand, followed by the end-phase floating effect. This card has actually aged pretty well ever since its first printing. In fact, if anything, it's gotten even better over the years due to monsters being so easy to special summon nowadays. Not a hard once per turn in any way makes it the perfect combo extender, and even providing a halfway decent shield from a direct attack in a pinch before netting you a search. Overall perfect for the deck, and most definitely a 3 of. Their last main deck monster at that time is T.G. Rush Rhino, a level 4 Earth beast with 1600 attack and 800 defense, and if this card attacks, it gains 400 attack during the damage step only, then the end phase floating effect. This card was once the poster boy of the TG stun variant once upon a time, due to the fact that it becomes a level 4 2k beater when attacking with it. However, times have changed and this card is simply not as good as it once was back then. And while there are plenty of level 1 tuners to go with this card, as we'll discuss later, Rush Rhino is still sadly not used as much due to the newer support just being so amazing in comparison. I'm not saying that Rhino is bad by any means, just very deck dependent, run only by preference and or variant. As with every synchro based archetype, TGs of course has their own Synchro Monsters to boot. The first of these is T.G. Power Gladiator, a level 5 warrior synchro with 2300 attack and 1000 defense, requires 1 tuner and 1 or more non-tuner TG monsters to summon, and has the following effect. If this card attacks a defense position monster, inflict piercing damage. If this card in the field is destroyed, draw 1 card. It's okay, I guess. I wasn't around in the game when TG stun was a thing, so I might imagine that this was probably a 1 to 2 of in said builds. But even with that said, this is by far and large the least useful TG synchro, at least concerning the synchro variants, but could still very easily see play in the modern day stun build, just not in the hyper synchro build. Going ahead in time for a bit, we have T.G. Hyper Librarian, another level 5 synchro, this time a dark spellcaster with 2400 attack and 1800 defense. It's completely generic with its materials, and if a monster is synchro summoned, draw 1 card. This card must be face up on the field to activate and to resolve this effect. There's a reason why this card was limited for such a long time. Not only does it net you a draw whenever any player synchro summons, but because it's a 5Ds card, no hard ones per turns are to be seen anywhere, and with multiples on board, it's possible for you to easily blow through at least half of your deck. And that's just in the Quasar Turbo builds. In pure TGs? Yeah, it's just as good as you think it is, if not more so. In fact, I honestly see this card returning to the ban list once the Master Rule revisions hit. Regardless, you'll be maxing out on this card whenever possible because it's just simply that good. T.G. Wonder Magician is a level 5 light spellcaster tuner synchro with 1900 attack and 0 defense, requires a tuner and 1 or more non-tuner TGs to summon, and her effect is as follows. If this card is synchro summoned, target 1 spell or trap card in the field, destroy it. If this card in the field is destroyed, draw 1 card. Once per chain during your opponent's main phase, you can, as a quick effect, immediately after this effect resolves, synchro summon using this card you control. Can't seem to go 5 seconds without mentioning Mr. Bankbreaker himself now, can we? Well, Wonder Magician saw a bit of online play for a hot second due to it being a suitable target for Crystal Halka Fibrax, where by banishing itself it summons a synchro tuner from the extra deck while treating said summon as a synchro summon. So in doing so, Wonder Magician would then be able to pop an opponent's spell or trap that they either activated or set that turn. But ignoring Firebags for the time being, Wonder Magician is still a fairly solid card despite her being very match dependent. It wouldn't hurt to run her in TGs, but due to extra deck space being so tight, especially as we continue on, I would consider her side deck worthy for the time being. So with this deck having its own tuner synchro, it's only natural for it to have its own Excel synchro boss monster to rival that of Yusei's Shooting Star Dragon. and you'd think that it would actually be a really good rival boss monster, right? Well, T.G. Blade Blaster is a level 10 Earth Machine Synchro with 3300 attack and 2200 defense, requires a tuner Synchro and one or more non-tuner Synchros to summon and has this effect. During either player's turn, when your opponent activates a spell or trap card that targets this face-up card, you can send one card from your hand to the graveyard, negate the effect. Once per turn during your opponent's turn, you can banish one TG monster from your graveyard, banish this face-up card in the field as a quick effect. During the next standby phase, after this card was banished by this effect, special summon this card. Well, at the very least, its effect of banishing itself until the next standby phase ended up being inspiration for the single most hated Synchro Monster in the game, if anything's to go by. Not gonna lie, this is a little bit of an oddball Synchro. While its self-banishing effect can help avoid problem cards in a pinch, it ends up completely negating the purpose of its self-protection effect of being untargetable by spell and trap effects. Speaking of which, why doesn't it also cover monster effects? And why doesn't it also destroy the card at the source? Overall, I think its main purpose is to just be a 3300 beta that can protect itself from widespread destruction and monster effects in a pinch. Which is fine, but it probably could have been a whole lot better. You'll still play it regardless, and that's not really a bad thing. The Synchros don't start with Blade Blaster just yet. Up next is T.G.s Pro Dragonfly, a level 2 Wind Insect Synchro with 300 attack and defense, generic materials and this effect. Once per turn, you can target one other TG Synchro monster you control, send it to the graveyard, then if all the Synchro monsters that were used for its Synchro summon are in your graveyard, you can special summon all of them. This is essentially a more interesting version of D-Synchro. As while D-Synchro puts the Synchro monster back into the extra deck, Despacito Dragonfly here instead sends it to the graveyard so it can be revived later on. But that's where it becomes a double-edged sword, as your opponent can also interact with that sent monster as much as you can. Really, this effect is only here so you can send your Synchro summoned Blade Blaster to the grave to revive its materials and go into their true boss monster. Mind you, it still uses a level 2 Synchro to go into a level 12 in pure TG, so it's not all bad news, I guess. And so, with the power of Wonder Magician, Despacito Dragonfly, and another level 5 TG Synchro, we get this archetype's true boss monster, the almighty Delta XL Synchro. And his name is T.G. Halberd Power Crept Cannon. A level 12 Earth Machine Synchro with 4000 attack and defense, requires a tuner Synchro and 2 or more non-tuner Synchros to summon, must be Synchro summoned and cannot be special summoned by other ways. Once per turn during either player's turn when a monster or monsters would be summoned, you can negate the summon and if you do, destroy that monster. This card must be face up on the field to activate and to resolve this effect. When this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, you can target one TG monster in your graveyard, special summon that target. When I called this guy Power Crept, I was not even remotely kidding. Not even soon after this card's release, there came along another level 12 Synchro called Shooting Quasar Dragon, and the rest is basically history. Add insult to injury, in 2017 we would get another fantastic level 12 Synchro in the form of Cosmic Blazar Dragon, only further contributing to this card's poor age. I mean, you can still technically run it if you so desire, but honestly using Quasar or Blazar to excel Synchro into would be a much safer bet, even though this card has the ability to bring back another TG monster. Say, the Blade Blaster you just sent to the grave by Dragonfly's effect? The option's still there, but considering the unfortunate case of power creep, it's probably not worth it, unless you're using a certain build that we'll discuss later on. Before we jump ahead to the newer support, it's worth looking at the first wave of spells and traps. We start off with the quick play spell TGX1HL. Oh, don't worry, those names will only get better from here on out. Target one TG monster you control, its attack and defense each become half its current attack and defense, and if they do, destroy one other spell or trap card on the field. Archetypal MSTs were pretty common for the time period, but the card was already unlimited at that time. Plus, with the existence of other back row removal cards nowadays like Twin Twisters, Cosmic Cyclone, and Lightning Storm, this really isn't worth running. I mean, you could technically run it, but why? Why would you do that? Why would you do any of that? TGX300 is a continuous spell that says, all face-up monsters you control gain 300 attack for each TG monster you control. Yeah, let's move on and pretend that this card never existed. Their first trap card is TG1EM1. Okay, seriously, if anyone could explain to me the meaning behind these spell and trap names in the comments, then I'd greatly appreciate it. Thank you. Its effect reads, target one monster your opponent controls and one TG monster you control, switch control of both monsters. This card is friggin' hilarious. An archetypal creature swap implemented on a trap card makes for the perfect disruption strategy given the right circumstances, even seeing play in TG stun. It's not as useful in the synchro-centric builds due to you spending most of your time synchroing away, but if you want to add a little spice to your deck, then go right ahead and use it to piss off the meta by stealing off their best monsters. Otherwise, any less than 2 in the stun variant would be idiotic. TGX3DX2 is their next trap card with this effect. Target 3 TG monsters in your graveyard, shuffle all 3 into your deck, then draw 2 cards. Not bad per se. Yes, this was made in a time where Pot of Avarice was still legal, but not for too long, so it would only make sense to give them an archetypal Pot of Avarice of sorts. Fine in the stun variants, but with Pot of Avarice legal at the time of this video being made, its worth just isn't as good, especially in the hyper synchro builds. Their last trap card for that time is T.G.s. When a TG monster you control destroys an opponent's monster by battle and sends it to the graveyard, target one TG Synchro Monster in your graveyard, special summon that target. Or, here's a thought, just play Monster Reborn! And even if it was banned at the time, which it wasn't, I did my research, there was still another good revival trap at the time known as Call of the Haunted. This card was simply dead on arrival and will probably remain dead until the end of time. Don't even bother with this one. And thus brings an end to the 5D's era TG support, where after Inzectors and Wind-Ups tore the meta a new one, the deck would go into hiding for another 7 years. That was until the set Savage Strike came along and brought with it some new support to attempt to fix the deck's problems as well as modernize it for the current day. We start this new line of support with TG Tank Grub, a level 1 Earth Insect tuner with 0 attack and defense and the following effect. If this card you control is used as synchro material for a TG monster, you can treat it as a non-tuner. If this card is sent to the graveyard as synchro material for a TG monster, you can special summon one TG token, a level 1 Earth machine with 0 attack and defense, in attack position. You can only use this effect of TG Tank Grub once per turn. I am so glad that this effect of treating itself as a non-tuner exists, because in conjunction with another couple of monsters later down the line, it makes for easier combo extensions. The same can also be said for its token spawning effect, great for continuing your combos as well as for synchro climbing. But because this is a hard once per turn, it limits your constant use for this card, but running at least one shouldn't hurt. The next main deck monster is TG Booster Raptor, a level 1 wind dinosaur.
You know, the
T.G.s
dinosaur. The famous
T.G.s
dinosaur.
Anyway, it has 400 attack and 300 defense, and if you control a TG monster, you can special summon this card from your hand. You can only special summon TG Booster Raptor once per turn this way, and once per turn, end phase floating effect. I have no clue why they decided to make this card a dinosaur instead of, oh I don't know, a winged beast. But in doing so, it actually gives this deck a nice little tech option in the form of Miscellaneous Saurus, so it can also be summoned from the deck. But even putting that part aside, it's a TG monster that can easily special summon itself, which is something this deck needed more of. Even though there's another level 1 non-tuner monster that can special summon itself easily, as we'll find out later on, Booster Raptor is still a brilliant card the deck needed, and is still worth running at no less than 2. Their last main deck monster from the Savage Strike support is TG Screw Serpent, a level 4 Water Sea Serpent tuner with 1300 attack and 500 defense in this effect. If this card is normal or special summoned, you can target one level 4 or lower TG monster in your graveyard except another copy of itself, special summon that monster but its effects are negated. You can banish this card from your graveyard, then target one TG monster you control, increase or reduce its level by 1 until the end of this turn. You can only use each effect of TG Screw Serpent once per turn. This is something TGs desperately needed, a way for them to revive their lost monsters so they can attempt to make a comeback. And if that wasn't enough, they'd even adjust the levels of your monsters to further help you for synchro plays. The deck already had a fairly solid grind game, especially in the stun variants, so this just helps out even further with being able to make a comeback should you open poorly with TGs with the end phase floating effect. If you're not playing 3 of this, you're probably not playing TGs. Savage Strike also brought along a couple new extra deck monsters to help this deck further, the first of which being T.G.s Star Guardian. Aside from being a cute little nod to Antimony's D-Wheel, it's also a level 5 Light Machine Tuner synchro with 100 attack and 2200 defense, requires a tuner and one or more non-tuner TGs to summon, and its effect reads, once per chain during your opponent's main phase, you can, quick effect, immediately after this effect resolves, synchro summon using this card you control. You can only use each of the following effects of T.G. Star Guardian once per turn. If this card is special summoned, you can target one TG monster in your graveyard, add it to your hand. During your main phase, you can special summon one TG monster from your hand. I'm honestly baffled as to why we didn't get this sooner. Bringing a TG back from graveyard to hand on special summon, not just synchro summon, makes it both a great recovery tool and a solid play extender. And it being able to special summon a TG from hand only further contributes to its great utility. This is exactly how you're supposed to make an archetypal synchro monster, as well as a great archetypal tuner to boot. Due to this, you may often have no need for Wonder Magician in your extra deck due to space being so tight, but as I already suggested, having her inside is still a good enough option. Running any less than 2 in the Hyper Synchro build would be moronic, so it's often worth playing it safe by maxing out on this guy. Despite all this great support for a synchro deck, there was just one tiny little problem. It was all released during Master Rule 4 when you needed Link monsters just to combo extend using an extra deck. So naturally, they updated TGs into the modern era with a Link monster. And it's certainly an archetypal Link monster, that's for sure. T.G. Trident Launcher is a Link 3 Earth machine with 2200 attack, Link arrows pointing bottom left, bottom and bottom right, requires at least 2 effect monsters, including a TG tuner, and has the following effect. If this card is Link summoned, you can special summon 3 TG monsters, 1 from your hand, 1 from your deck, and 1 from your graveyard, in defense position to your zones this card points to. Also, you cannot special summon monsters for the rest of this turn except TG monsters. You can only use this effect of TG Trident Launcher once per turn. Your opponent cannot target TG Synchro Monsters this card points to with card effects. There's a lot of things to discuss about this card, and sadly, not all of them are positive. This card is basically a win condition now, and if you just so happen to have this effect negated in some way, you might as well just scoop and move on to the next game. Trident Launcher essentially turns TG into a helmet deck, with this being the cover card, making it the perfect target for Ash Blossom and some other hand trap effect negator, which is an absolute shame because holy hell, this deck needed a Link monster. That isn't a Crystron card. Being fully able to make up for its resources on summon is nothing short of ridiculous, even being able to further set you up for massive synchro plays and further advantage. And while it does lock you out of summoning non-TGs for the turn, do also remember that the deck can excel synchro, so you can still technically summon other non-synchro TGs such as, but not limited to, Stardust Warrior, Borrowed Savage Dragon if using other Link monsters, and the previously mentioned shooting Quasar and Cosmic Blazar dragons. Additionally, with its materials being so easy to accomplish within its own archetype, you should hopefully be able to bring this thing out on your first turn with relative ease. A perfect example of an archetypal Link monster done right, without having to be so heavily exploited outside of its own archetype, unlike so many other Link monsters out there. Not running this card would be a crime in the Synchro variant, so playing at least 2 would be ideal, though only 1 could also be acceptable due to extra deck space. The next main set, Dark Neostorm, wouldn't see new TG support per se, but instead would give birth to new support for Assault mode of all decks, attempting to fix a ton of their problems while also giving them a new Assault mode boss monster to boot. And that came in the form of TG Halberd Cannon Assault mode. a level 12 Earth Machine main deck monster with 4500 attack and defense, cannot be normal summoned as set, and must be special summoned with Assault mode activate. You can only use each of the following effects of T.G. Halberd Cannon Assault mode once per turn. When your opponent would summon a monster, quick effect, you can negate the summon, and if you do, banish that monster and all special summoned monsters your opponent controls. When this card in the field is destroyed, you can target one T.G. Halberd Cannon in your graveyard, special summon it ignoring its summoning conditions. Well, if anything, it certainly isn't as power-crept as its lesser form. Not only can it negate a monster summon, and not only is that monster banished, but it also banishes all of the opponent's special summon monsters, almost as if it's holding out a giant middle finger to Pendulum players. Sure, it can't mass negate summons, like its power-crept cousin, but man is it still hilarious to pull off. The problem here is that it still shares a vast number of problems like all the other Assault mode monsters that proceed before it. You have to play a dedicated build to turboing out that Assault mode monster by running a bunch of bricky cards, and if you just so happen to be unlucky enough to hard draw that said monster without also having Assault mode 0,
sucks to be you!
You can technically still run it for the memes if you want to. Hell, I know I did for TG's 101, but I would advise against it if trying to make a competitive build. The next proper line of support would arrive in Battles of Legend Heroes Revenge, where we would get 4 new cards of varying quality. The first of these cards is T.G.s Zombie, a level 1 Dark Zombie tuner with 600 attack and 0 defense, and with this effect. You can target one TG monster you control, special summon this card from your hand, then the targeted monster loses 1000 attack. You can only use this effect of T.G.s Zombie once per turn. Well, would you look at that, another solid tuner monster, and one that can easily special summon itself to boot. The attack loss is often inconsequential in the grand scheme of things, since that monster will more than likely be synchroed or linked away for further combo extension. Overall, this is just another really good tuner monster that's probably worth running multiples of. The next monster, T.G. Drillfish, is by far and large the funniest the deck has to offer. It's a level 1 World of Fish with 100 attack and 800 defense, and this card can attack directly. You can only use each of the following effects of T.G. Drillfish once per turn. If all the monsters you control are TG monsters, minimum 1, you can special summon this card from your hand. When a TG monster you control inflicts battle damage to your opponent, you can target one monster your opponent controls, destroy it. So the reason why I call this the funniest card in their arsenal is because of its third and third effects. It can attack directly, for 100 damage, and should that damage be successful, it can destroy an opposing Boral Sword Dragon. Just let that sink in. The love child of Genji and Cold Steel the Hedgehog, that can't be destroyed in battle, can be outed by one little fish. Yeah, jokes aside, this is another solid play extender and an even funnier boss monster killer, one no less than 2. T.G. Metal Skeleton is a level 2 Dark Zombie with 1100 attack and 0 defense, and with this effect. If a monster or monsters on the field is destroyed by battle on opponent's card effect, you can special summon this card from your hand. If a TG monster or monsters you control would be destroyed by battle or card effect, you can banish this card from your field or graveyard instead. You can only use each effect of T.G. Metal Skeleton once per turn. I mean, I find this to be pretty lackluster, and that's probably being generous. The protection effect is cute, with you at least being able to save your large TG monsters from destruction for a hot second, but I feel that its special summoning effect is really situational and would only work as a last-ditch effort to keep your life points safe. In fact, that's the best way I can describe this card. Situational. If they at least gave it the end phase floating effect, then it might be able to see a little bit of play. Even still, I personally wouldn't run it myself, but who knows? Maybe it could see some play in the stun variant? I don't know. Their last card from Heroes Revenge is the trap card Sonic Stun. When an opponent's monster declares an attack, negate the attack, then you can special summon one TG monster or one level 4 lower tuner from your hand or deck. If stun decks like Ghoul Control have taught us anything, it's that battle traps can still very much be relevant, and this is no exception. Though it's basically useless in the Hyper Synchro variant, it could still have some relevance in a modern TG stun deck, dishing out a TG monster with the end phase floating effect at the worst of times to potentially net you a search. And putting TGs aside, it nets you any low level tuner to boot, making it useful for slower synchro based decks to use. I wouldn't recommend using this in the synchro variant, but would approve of using this if you want to play the stun variant. And with that said, that brings an end to this deck's lineup, except psych! Turns out that TG's wound up getting a new monster in the OCG's Legendary Gold Box, meaning that we'll probably be getting this card soon. So what are we getting? A new main deck tuner to help start combos? A spell that can actually see use in any TG build? Or maybe even a new boss monster to replace Halberd Cannon? Shooting Star Dragon TG Expansion is a level 10 Wind Dragon Synchro with 3300 attack and 2500 defense, requires a tuner synchro and one or more non-tuner synchros to summon and has this effect. When a monster effect is activated that targets a monster or monsters you control, quick effect, you can banish one tuner from your graveyard, negate the activation. If you do, destroy that card. You can only use each of the following effects of Shooting Star Dragon TG Expansion once per turn. When an opponent's monster declares an attack, you can negate the attack. During your opponent's turn, if this card is in your graveyard, quick effect, you contribute 2 Synchro Monsters, special summon this card. As you can hear, my thoughts and feelings toward this card are mostly negative. On one hand, its effect of stopping monsters from targeting your monsters with effects are fine, and its once per turn attack negation is cute, but the huge issue I have with this card is its third effect. Tributing 2 Synchro Monsters for a simple revival is already a hefty cost on its own, especially since we already have Monster Reborn to do that, but limiting this effect to only being activated on your opponent's turn is, for lack of better terms, shit. Sure, you can get some monster targeting protection in the form of a 3300 body, but you still could have used those same Synchro Monsters you tributed to Axel Synchro into something better than this. It's not terrible, but rather unnecessary. And much like Blade Blaster, it's nothing to write home about either. Feel free to run by preference whenever we finally get this. At long last, with all the cards all mentioned and reviewed, including that unnecessary piece of junk, we can finally talk about the deck's strengths and weaknesses. For starters, TGs often have a pretty solid grind game due to some of their main deck monsters and face floating effects, and this is especially apparent where the stun variant is concerned. The Synchro variant, on the other hand, is mostly about raw power in their extra deck lineup. When TGs pop off, they pop off hard, being able to put up a healthy amount of disruptions to boot. And even when that is concerned, they still have a good enough grind game to make a comeback, with Screw Serpent being a prime example of being both a great comeback card and a combo extender. On top of that, they can also be super consistent. Under the right circumstances, the TG Synchro variant can easily blow through half of their deck to ensure that making a comeback and continuing your combo is of no concern. Consistency isn't too much of an issue for the stun variant though, when power traps are your best friends. Board wipes and their archetypal creature swap work wonders for this version, even though it never exactly topped per se. However, the weaknesses TGs have are extremely evident. For one thing, they need outside engines in order to properly function, and because of how linear the Synchro variant is in turboing out Trident Launcher, a well-timed hand trap will completely destroy any hope the deck had of taking complete control of the game. And even putting the hand traps aside, TG Synchro isn't exactly the easiest deck to master. It's mostly RNG based with primary focus on Hyperlibrarian's draw effect, meaning if worse comes to worse, they'll probably be only able to end on a simple level 10 Synchro, if not set up for a level 10 Synchro. And even then, you need to get a good grasp on all of the monsters you use in order to make full advantage of their often hard to make plays. Plus, against a deck that doesn't want to make a ton of plays to begin with, the Synchro variant may also flop on the opponent's turn, since they need something to chain in order to excel Synchro. While the newer monsters certainly help out with continuing your combo, they still lack good spells and traps in order to make better use of the appropriate situation. The archetypal creature swap and semi-Pot of Avarice, alongside Sonic Stun, are both fine, but everything else ranges from meh to straight up awful. They just need better spells more than anything, as the traps, for the most part, are often pretty decent. Lastly, and most importantly, if you're able to lock down their graveyard effects in Revival, then they're definitely going to struggle. Their in-phase floating effects are what gives TGs the grind game reputation they deserve, so locking that out will heavily cripple their comeback ability. With the strengths and weaknesses addressed, let me give a few tips if one were to make a dedicated TG deck. As I mentioned earlier, TGs need outside engines in order to fully function, and probably the best engine to use is the Warrior engine. Junk Forward, Nude Space Connector, Aquadolphin and Isolde, alongside the Bamboo engine, helps out tremendously with boosting consistency and draw power. One could even throw in other good equipped spells like Phoenix Blade and Living Fossil for further combo extension and reusability. For helping search other good TG monsters, Reinforcement of the Army works very well. Fire Formation Tenki can also help with searching out Warwolf, while Miscellaneous Source can help with summoning TG Booster Raptor from the deck, as I mentioned earlier. Speaking of things that I mentioned earlier, you can still run other powerful non-TG Synchro Monsters to excel Synchro into on the opponent's turn. Stardust Warrior is another solid level 10 that can negate summons by tributing itself before bringing itself back on the end phase, Borrowed Savage Dragon if using Isolde to provide additional negation, and of course, the limit over excel synchros of shooting Quasar, Cosmic Blazer, and potentially even Stardust Cypher Divine Dragon for even further negation, although Cosmic Blazer would be your best bet due to tight extra deck space. Or for a little extra spice, you could also run the level 9 Synchro Heroes, Trishula Dragon of the Ice Barrier, and for added cheddar cheese, Crystron Quarion Gandrax, though the latter isn't exactly recommended. And since you know it's a synchro deck, and the fact that I've never failed to bring it up for even 5 seconds during this video, you can also run Hauka Fibrax, if you want to go overdrawn anyway. As for the stun variant, go nuts with the power traps. Torrential Tribute, Mind Drain, Skill Drain, the most hated floodgate in the entire game, the world is your oyster. While for draw power, the extra deck isn't as needed as much as the Hyper Synchro counterpart, but still recommended. But even with that said, Pot of Extravagance should still work perfectly fine, though Pot of Desires still works just as well as a budget alternative, depending on how short-printed they'll make Extravagance in the upcoming Toon Chaos. Oh, and of course, hand traps. A healthy, or rather unhealthy, amount of hand traps. That's about as much as I can give concerning TGs. As for the archetype itself, it's honestly rather intriguing that a synchro deck would initially see success as a stun deck of all things. And I think the main reason for that is simply because, ironically enough, they have no real way of succeeding as a hyper synchro deck at the time since there were so few monsters to help facilitate that. Maybe they had Level E2 and other strong cards at the time, but even with them in mind, they still wouldn't succeed in their intended hyper synchro purpose. Which is a shame because now they're finally functioning as intended to be made, but probably won't see any further form of competitive play as far as I can see. At the end of the day though, TGs at least managed to finally become the hyper synchro deck that they always dreamed of becoming ever since Arrival, and as far as I see it, that's really all that matters. Hey guys, I'd like to thank you all for watching. I hope you like this kind of content to go along with my Yu-Gi-Oh! 101 series, because I plan on continuing this to first catch up on where I currently am on my Yu-Gi-Oh! 101s, before moving on to the next 101 of Flower Guardians. If you want to see more of this kind of content, then please consider subscribing. You can also follow me on Twitter using the link found in the description. Next time will be a Yu-Gi-Oh! 101 database on Heraldic Beasts. Until then, this is Mr. Orichalcos, signing out.